Now on Radio 4, the world's most famous living scientist turns 70 this coming Sunday. Professor Stephen Hawking has, for the past 5 decades, been at the forefront of cosmology, the study of both black holes and the birth of the universe. But to celebrate his extraordinary life and his work, we begin a new series now on Radio 4 with the help of colleagues, friends, family, and letters that have been sent to him from all over the world in Dear Professor Hawking.
Dear Professor Hawking, I've been interested by the fact that you seem to think that we should not send out
that you've received a great deal of mail regarding your
Some ideas have come to mind that I think you'll find relevant concerning the
If you could talk to Albert Einstein, what would you say? I strongly suggest that in the future you refrain from any reference to God and the
When will
hereafter.
the human race meet its end?
I'm sure you get 1 million of these emails.
May God have mercy on your soul.
Who are you?
Is yours the greatest mind of our time?
Are we alone?
Will you, in your lifetime, find the theory of everything?
Who
Who are you?
Hello. My name is Stephen Hawking. I was born on the 8th of January, 1942, exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo. However, I estimate that about 200,000 other babies were also born that day. I don't know whether any of them were also interested in astronomy and black holes. Hello. My name is Stephen Hawking.
Hello, I'm Judith Crosdell and I'm Stephen Hawking's personal assistant, and I have been that now for 7 years. Well, I suppose basically my job is the gateway. You get all the initial contact, and there's paper everywhere. We have a massive amount of correspondence, and they're on every crevice on my desk virtually, but I basically try not to throw them away. I like to log them and have some idea of who the people are and what they're writing about. Ill health to money worries to astronomical strangeness, from aliens to UFOs to personal encounters with aliens to absolutely everything you can think of. And we get a lot of letters from children who read his books and who are very appreciative of trying to understand the incredible things that they read about. And they're very clever, some of them, and very young. We have a 14-year-old writing in here.
Dear Professor Stephen Hawking, after learning about space in science class, I have become interested and confused about black holes. What would happen to an astronaut if he fell into a black hole?
The rest mass energy of the astronaut will be recycled as radiation sent out by the black hole. But the astronaut himself, or even the particles of which he is made, won't come back out of the black hole. So the question is, what happens to them? Do they get destroyed, or do they pass into another universe? That is something I would dearly like to know, not that I'm thinking of jumping into a black hole. My name is Stephen Hawking.
My name is Lucy Hawking. My father is Stephen Hawking. I was born just before my father had his massive eureka moment about what happens when two black holes collide. So that was one of his great discoveries, which means that the colliding black holes and I pretty much share a birthday.
I couldn't carry on with my life if I only had physics. Like everyone else, I need warmth, love, and affection. Again, I'm very fortunate, much more fortunate than many people with my disabilities, in receiving a great deal of love and affection.
A few years ago, we went out for dinner in Cambridge, and it was a summer evening, and he decided we would walk home. He didn't want to go the long way round by the road. He wanted to go the short way round, which meant cutting across a park in Cambridge, where all the sort of young people of Cambridge go out there on a Friday night to hang out. And we said, really, is that a good idea? You really want to take the route across the park? And he was insistent he did. So we walk across the park, and suddenly realised we're starting to be followed. We've got this, it's like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. We've got all these kids behind us going, yo, Stevie, it's Stephen Hawking. He's a legend. Come on, it's Stephen Hawking. Look, I found Stephen Hawking. He's over here. And there were more and more of them. We were like growing this massive tail of kids behind us. And they were all lovely. They were hilarious, and they were jumping around, and they were trying to impress him. Eventually we passed a policeman, and the policeman said, all right, boys, okay, let the professor go home now. And they were like, oh.
I couldn't carry on with my life if I only had physics. Warmth, love, and affection.
Dear Professor Stephen Hawking, when I grow up, I would like to work as an astrophysicist or a nuclear engineer. So I thought, who should I ask to write about this but the best? I really admire your work in physics, even though some of it I don't understand. I'm astonished that someone can know so much about a subject as you do. When I'm older, I hope that I can get my name in the history books and discover something new, even though, by then, there will be very little left to discover in the universe. How do you come up with all these theories? I can come up with some theories, but I'm often extremely tired at night looking out the window and pondering the simplest of things. Is it in fact possible that space is indeed endless?
Observations indicate that the universe is expanding at an ever-increasing rate. It will expand forever, getting emptier and darker. Although the universe doesn't have an end, it had a beginning in the Big Bang. One might ask what is before that, but the answer is that there is nowhere before the Big Bang, just as there is nowhere south of the South Pole.
I had the idea that it would be wonderful to work with my father to create an adventure story about a small boy called George who lives next door to the world's greatest living scientist, a man called Eric, and his fabulous and extraordinary computer Cosmos, in order to explain something of the cosmic reality of our universe to young people. I noticed that my father was getting more and more questions from young people who wanted to know things, and they wanted to know things in a very specific way, like, what would happen to me if I fell into a black hole? And they were absolutely gripped.
Dear Mr. Hawking, I have been learning about gravity, and I would like to know why Earth has gravity. Nobody else seems to know, and I know that you are very clever.
And I also noticed how good my father was at answering these questions in a way that kids found very engaging. They found his style of speech very interesting and very accessible. So I thought we have something here, and we could do this. We could write a series of adventure stories which would explain the universe to the young audience who so very much want to know.
Dear Mr. Hawking, I think your books were really great. It's so good that when our teacher stops, everyone says, please carry on.
Dear Mr. Hawking, I am writing to you because I like your books. They are brilliantly funny. My favourite bit was all of it.
Dear Mr. Hawking, I vastly love George's Secret Key to the Universe. I think this book is 100 out of 100.
Dear Professor Hawking, I am 10 years old and a fan of your work. I'm writing to you as it is book week at school, and you are my favourite author. Do you like Pokemon? If you do, what is your favourite Pokemon? When I'm older, I want to be a successful professor like you.
Dear Mr. Stephen Hawking, can you team up with 2 other scientists to accomplish the most amazing thing I've ever thought of? Can you invent me something that will make me not effective to gravity? In other words, make me fly!
I'm Tim Hawking. I'm Stephen's youngest son. When I say youngest, that I'm 32, so not that young anymore. I started to become aware of the fact that my dad was becoming famous. You know, there were more and more references to him on the TV. I suppose his level of wealth increased, and that manifested itself for me through suddenly being given some more expensive toy sets. I got to travel to New York with him via Concorde. An interesting thing happened actually when we were waiting in the departure lounge at Heathrow for that trip. I remember being a rather excitable 10-year-old, and I was pushing a trolley along, and I accidentally tapped an American man in the back of the leg with the trolley, and he turned around and swore at me. And then interestingly, about 5 minutes later, when he saw that I was with my dad, he was sort of abject in apology.
We used to get an awful lot of phone calls, and they would happen at strange hours of the day and night. And I would quite often answer the phone. So I would be sort of 8 years old, I'd pick up the phone and someone would say, I need to speak to Stephen Hawking now. And I'd say, well, I'm sorry, but he's not in. And they'd say, but I must speak to him, I must. There's an immense cosmic collapse. The universe is about to explode. And I'd say, oh, can you hang on? I'm just trying to write all that down. And invariably they'd ring off in fury.
I mean, he's an incredibly well-known, iconic figure. There's no mistaking him, really. You know it's him. Despite He had a kind of a preset phrase on his voice machine that just he could bash out. He used to pretend that he was a doppelganger for Stephen Hawking and wasn't the real one, which didn't fool anyone.
I suppose I'm naturally a bit introverted, and my difficulties in communication has forced me to rely on myself. But I was a great talker as a boy.
Dear Stephen Hawking, I am 10 years old. I am a follower of your physics theories and explanations. Your writing has inspired me to study physics.
My father did research in tropical medicine. Because he was a scientific researcher, I felt that scientific research was the natural thing to do when one grew up. I remember coming home late one night from London. In those days, they turned the street lights out at midnight to save money. I saw the night sky as I had never seen it before, with the Milky Way going right across.
He was a very useful resource to have around when it came to doing maths homework. If I enlisted his help for a particular assignment in maths, my scores would suddenly jump from sort of 60% to 95, 96%.
Dear Mr. Hawking, I'm 14 years old. I'm writing to thank you for your enormous contribution to science. It is extremely difficult to express the depth of the admiration I feel for you and other such extraordinary scientists. You were one of the first scientists I learned about when I was just 9 years old, and I heard from one of my friends at school that there was someone alive today who was smarter than Albert Einstein, and his name is Dr. Stephen Hawking. I cannot understand all of your books, but the parts that I can, especially in your excellent A Brief History of Time, I read with relish. One thing you may enjoy hearing is that on my application essay for high school, in which we were asked to name the 4 people whom we consider the greatest in history, you were someone that I wrote about. I was accepted into that school.
Dear Mr. Stephen Hawking, I was watching your show with curiosity about whether God created the universe. When you said that God doesn't exist, I thought, well, then maybe he didn't create the universe. My question is it possible that the universe created God? Sincerely, a young viewer.
Dear Stephen Hawking, I am 9 years old. I've heard about you many times. I've also heard that you believe in aliens. I believe that aliens are real too. I believe that most aliens are as intelligent as wild animals today, though I think that aliens who are more intelligent than humans are rare. Anyway, you're one of the reasons why I want to be a scientist.
We believe that life arose spontaneously on the Earth, so it must be possible for life to appear on other suitable planets, of which there seem to be a large number in the galaxy. On the other hand, we don't seem to have been visited by aliens. I am discounting reports of UFOs. Why would they appear only to cranks and weirdos? Despite an extensive search by the SETI project, we haven't heard any alien television quiz shows. This probably indicates that there are no alien civilizations at our stage of development within a radius of a few hundred light years.
Somebody asked him what he thought was the most important thing about his career, and he said he was very glad to have been able to make a small contribution to our understanding of the universe in which we live, but that for him that universe would be a very empty place if he had not had the love of his family. So I'll end there.
I have a beautiful family, I have been successful in my work, and I have written a bestseller. One really can't ask for more. Warmth, love, and affection.
Dear Professor Hawking was produced by Julian Mayers and is a Sweet Talk production for BBC Radio 4. It's Will and Nick's big day in The Archers after the news, and then it's 1956 and the fruity-voiced raconteur, tuba player and occasional Quasimodo impersonator Gerard Hoffnung is about to unveil his latest madcap scheme, a Hoffnung Music Festival. Starring Matt Lucas and originally broadcast to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Gerard Hoffnung's. Today's studio director was Peter Wise and the editor was Juliette Dwyer. Now on Radio 4, Dear Professor Hawking, in which we continue our celebration of the life and work of the world's most famous scientist, who turns 70 this week. His scientific legacy has, since the 1960s, increased our understanding of the universe in the fields of general relativity, black holes, and the Big Bang itself.
To understand the universe at the deepest level, we need to know not only how the universe behaves, but why. We need to find answers to the questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why do we exist? And why does the universe follow this particular set of laws, and not some other? Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is now dead. Philosophy has not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge. Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is now dead.
Yes, okay, so I'm Martin Rees. I'm an astronomer astrophysicist, and I've been in Cambridge much of my career, and in fact first met Stephen when I joined as a research student, and he was in his third year. He was 2 years ahead of me. We both had the same PhD advisor, Dennis Sharma, and I'd heard already from Dennis Sharma that he'd taken on this student, Stephen Hawking, and he'd been told at the start that he might not live to finish his PhD, so he had to give him a suitable project that he would finish, and he already, by the time I joined, had shown his tremendous talents by getting involved in some of the early work on relativity.
Respect, dear sir. I am sending you my paper entitled I Have Defeated Einstein, in which I irrevocably prove that bodies can overcome the speed of light and that this is enough for rooting out Einstein's theory of relativity, which is built on the false assumption that the speed of light is not possible to overcome. I would like you to publish my paper as soon as possible.
Hello, I'm Judith Crosdell, and I'm Stephen Hawking's personal assistant. We get a lot of this. You get a lot of people sending in their ideas, theories, physics papers, what have you. Some are very good, some are not so good.
Dear Professor Hawking, in 1988 I constructed an apparatus. This consisted of a garden hose tied in a single strand Turk's head knot. 50 Hertz current was run through the primary and the secondary was connected to a 60-watt lamp. I was amazed when I turned it on. A mini black hole appeared and then vanished at its focus.
So we get a lot of this type of thing, but on the other hand, maybe one of my piles of letters here is from a potential Einstein. Would I ever recognise it? Would the professors, if I showed it to them, even want to drag their eyeballs across it, because they usually say, oh, not another letter. I mean, that is a responsibility which I do my best to try and find that Einstein in this pile.
Back at that time, certainly in the UK, there was a big debate about whether there was a Big Bang at all or whether the universe was in a steady state. And the focus of this debate was actually in Cambridge between two eminent scientists of completely contrasting personalities, Fred Hoyle and Martin Ryle. It was essentially being settled in the mid-60s. The Big Bang theory was taken seriously in the mid-1960s, and that was really the time when Stephen was starting his research.
Season's greetings, Professor Hawking. Hello, sir. Much to my personal embarrassment and shame, I genuinely feel obligated to inform you that I am a state prisoner, held captive in the state of Florida in the United States. If I can be very honest and straightforward with you, sir, I just could not seem to overcome the irresistible impulse to write to you because of a particular article about you in Discover magazine that revealed that you are very deeply committed to the research, study, and teaching of cosmology.
I'm Kip Thorne. I'm at Caltech. I'm the Richard P. Feynman Professor Emeritus. Stephen's early work was on the issue of whether there was truly a singularity at the beginning of the universe. And he gave a series of theorems, the strongest of which came a little later, jointly with Roger Penrose, that said, just based on the observational data that we have, plus Einstein's general relativity, plus very plausible assumptions about the nature of matter. There had to have been a singularity at the beginning. There had to have been an era when general relativity failed and it got replaced by laws of quantum gravity. An era when, if you had believed general relativity, the density of the universe would have been infinitely high.
The collapse of a star to form a black hole is in many ways like the time reverse of the expansion of the universe. There's an important difference. We are outside the black hole, but we are inside the universe. But both are characterized by thermal radiation.
Stephen's most distinctive breakthrough actually came in 1974, when he made this first step towards relating the theory of gravity to the quantum theory. Normally, of course, these are quite separate because gravity applies to big objects and quantum theory to atomic scale phenomena. Stephen came up in 1974 with what was really the first claimed result, which did depend on linking these two theories together. And this was a result which many people took a long time to believe, because it was a rather remarkable result, which predicted that a black hole would actually emit a bit of radiation as well as absorbing it. And this was a wonderful idea unifying three areas in science: relativity, quantum theory and thermodynamics, in a way it hadn't happened before.
And what I could read in your eyes from the photograph of you caused me to revisit and flash back to a delightful time when I was much younger and possessed an insatiable hunger to learn as much as I possibly could about the infinite wonders and mysteries that laid so far out from my mortal reach and comprehension. You have managed to reawaken these once intensely fond memories from me, and for the past several weeks now, you have given me good reason to be a very happy and reinvigorated fellow, in spite of the miserable and unforgiving environment that I found myself imprisoned in. You see, my dear Professor Hawking, as a young boy, I developed a deep inquisitive fascination for science and curiosity for what lay beyond this fragile planet of ours. And I explicitly remember being flooded with an endless amount of questions, with really nowhere to turn for any intelligent or adequate answers.
Dealing with all the correspondence and the emails and everything else, it's a bit like a black hole. Everything comes in, but nothing goes out except a little bit of Hawking radiation. And that's when I am able to respond, which is often under considerable pressure because of other matters. But it's ironic how life in the office can reflect Stephen's work as well as our own.
I rely on intuition a great deal. I try to guess the result, but I then have to prove it. And at this stage, I quite often find that what I had thought of is not true, or that something else is the case that I had never thought of. That is how I found black holes aren't completely black. I was trying to prove something else.
And I remember Stephen working on this. In fact, he was in an office just along the corridor from where we're speaking. And I remember I used to some days wheel him in a wheelchair, and he would sit down motionless in front of a book. He could even then hardly turn the pages. And he was reading books on quantum theory, which was a different subject from what he'd done before. And I remember thinking that perhaps it was too late to expect any great discoveries. But then he came out with this idea, which was probably his greatest idea. And the amazing thing is that that's 37 years ago now, and he's still going strong. But this idea really was perhaps his most important achievement, and it was so surprising that it was a year or two before even the other experts took it seriously.
Dear Professor Hawking, is time travel possible? And if so, what would you say to Albert Einstein if you were to go back in time to meet him?
I would ask him why he didn't believe in black holes. The field equations of his general theory of relativity imply that a large star, or cloud of gas, would collapse in on itself and form a black hole. Einstein was aware of this, but somehow managed to convince himself that something like an explosion would always occur to throw off mass and prevent the formation of a black hole. What if there was no explosion? are used to thinking of time as a single railway line on which one can go only in one direction. But what if the railway line had loops and branches so that one could come back to the same station? It seems that Einstein's general theory of relativity may allow this kind of behavior. Time and space are combined together in spacetime. This means that time as well as space can be warped or distorted. That is how time travel may be possible.
Anyway, my dear Professor Hawking, when I turned about 13 years old, my parents brought me an amateur telescope for Christmas. At that particular time in my life, it was simply the best Christmas present in the whole world. And I can still recall hugging, kissing, and thanking both my parents so repeatedly that Christmas morning that I had completely ignored the other Christmas presents that they had bought for me. I mean, put yourself in my shoes for a brief moment, Professor Hawking. I was the happiest lad in probably the entire state of Michigan.
Thinking of time as a single railway line on which one can go only in one direction.
Anyway, Professor Hawking, one thought I've repeatedly fought with for a very long time now is that if our sun was to go into a supernova right this very minute, it would be the end of mankind and everything else as we know it, forever. Please correct me if I'm wrong, my dear Professor, but if our sun did go into a supernova, would it also create a black hole?
I read a lot of science fiction when I was a teenager, but now I find most science fiction a bit facile. Real science is much more exciting because it is actually happening out there. Science fiction writers never suggested black holes before physicists thought of them. But we now have good evidence for a number of black holes.
Cygnus X1 was the first observational evidence that black holes might exist. Stephen made the bet that Cygnus X1 was not a black hole, jokingly saying that, well, if it turns out to be a black hole, then this is great for me because of all my predictions about black holes. If it turns out not to be a black hole, well, I want some solace of at least winning this bet. He was going to win a subscription to Private Eye, and I was going to win a subscription to Penthouse magazine. The bet lay quiet for about 25 years until 1990, when I was in Moscow. Stephen happened to be in Los Angeles lecturing, and by then the observational data had become extremely strong. And so he broke into my office at night with the help of one of my students and thumbprinted off on the bet that he was conceding. And so he started sending me the British version of Penthouse magazine, which was ever much more raunchy than the American version.
Anyway, Professor, without taking you through a long, drawn-out and somewhat boring story of my life, searching for elusive answers to numerous questions about deep space that sadly evade me today, let me just say that I am very, very honored to be in your presence through the pages of this letter to you today, sir. And I sincerely hope I haven't preemptively invaded your privacy or distracted you from more pressing matters. I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
We are used to thinking of time as a single railway line on which one can go only in one direction.
Dear Professor Hawking was produced by Julian Mayers and is a Sweet Talk production for BBC.
And now Radio 4, Dear Professor Hawking, in which we continue our celebration of the life and work of the world's most famous scientist, who turned 70 this week. He's been at the forefront of communicating scientific ideas to a worldwide audience since his book, A Brief History of Time, became a bestseller nearly 25 years ago and led to him becoming one of the planet's most recognised figures.
A Brief History of Time was first published on April Fool's Day, 1988. I don't think anyone, my publishers, my agent, or myself, expected the book to do anything like as well as it did. It was in the London Sunday Times bestseller list for 237 weeks, longer than any other book. It has now been translated into more than 40 languages, and has sold around one copy for every 750 men, women, and children in the world. As Nathan Myhrvold of Microsoft, a former postdoc of mine, remarked, I have sold more books on physics than Madonna has on sex.
Hello, I'm Judith Crosdell, and I'm Stephen Hawking's personal assistant. Well, what's lovely about this office is actually it's quite a big office, although it's swamped under books and things, but there's windows looking out onto glorious autumnal colours. And around me I'm looking at all Stephen's translations of all A Brief History of Time, A Briefer History of Time, The Grand Design, The Illustrated Brief History of Time, all his product, if you like. And there are over 50 translations now of his books, absolutely colossal. We have a massive amount of correspondence from fans.
Hello, respected Mr. Hawking. I am your faithful fan from Russia. I just want to say that I consider you to be a real man of genius. In my opinion, you're one of the most genius people in the history of mankind. You should know that here in Russia, many people really admire you and wait impatiently for your next articles, books, and films. For millions of people, you're an example of the real scientist and a real man. Oh, I love you. Thanks for everything you're doing for the mankind.
I have sold more books on physics than Madonna has on sex. I have sold more books.
Hello, Professor. I live in Gothenburg, Sweden, and work as a tour guide. I also import finger puppets from Peru. I really appreciate the work you do and have great admiration for your determination in life. I have enclosed a picture of my little Jack Russell dog named Lazy. Next time you are visiting Sweden, the coffee and strawberry cake is on us.
In his introduction to the original 1988 edition of the book, Carl Sagan suggested that modern adults spend little time wondering about nature, the cosmos, and time. I hope that the success of A Brief History indicates that he was wrong. There was, and continues to be, widespread interest in finding the answers to those big questions.
Dear Professor Hawking, does the universe end? If so, what is beyond it?
Are we alone in the universe?
Dear Professor Hawking, will you, in your lifetime, find the theory of everything?
How did the universe come into being?
Dear Professor Hawking, are we alone?
Where did we come from? I know Bernard Levin got stuck on page 29, but I know plenty of people have got further. All over the world, people tell me how much they have enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, I used to get really cross when people would say that Brief History of Time was the most famously unread book in publishing, because I've read that book from cover to cover several times. My name's Ben Bowie. I'm executive producer of a TV series with Stephen for Discovery Channel called Into the Universe with Stephen Hawking, and a second series called Stephen Hawking's Grand Design.
We can use the laws of nature to grasp the very origins of the universe.
Discovery asked us if we could come up with a groundbreaking cosmology show, and we had a think, and we thought, who's the most famous cosmologist on the planet? And there's one answer to that question. And we approached Stephen, which was very scary. I have to pinch myself a few times because you get rather blasé at it. You know, sitting next to Stephen. You know, how many people get to spend 4 hours in Stephen's company repeatedly, week in, week out? It's really good fun. Anyway, so then we go through line by line. So I'll read him the lines.
I believe it's a cosmologist's duty to try and work out where the universe came from. Luckily, it's not quite as difficult as it seems.
Then once I'd got everything in the line, I'd present that to Stephen, and he could go, oh yes, that fits together, yes, I can see how you've used that. This thing, no, you got this wrong. Like, just the other day, he said, this is completely wrong. And it's like, oh, really? He says, yeah, you've conflated special relativity and general relativity. And I was thinking, you know what, I have just conflated special relativity and general relativity. That's rather embarrassing.
Mr. Hawking, I have no intention of asking you a mathematical or scientific question. My question is a question that must be answered by a complete stranger. It is a question that has been on my mind for so very long. I love a woman who is a very untraditional female. Now, I truly, with all my soul, love her, for lack of a better word in any language, even physics. But since I gave her my heart, my life has become drab and sad. My question is, why?
I certainly don't have the answers to all life's problems. While physics and mathematics may tell us how the universe began, they are not much use in predicting human behavior, because there are far too many equations to solve. I am no better than anyone else at understanding what makes people tick, particularly women.
Oh, Dr. Hawking, we had such a beautiful dream. What went wrong?
Don't feel bad, Lisa. Sometimes the smartest of us can be the most childish.
Even you?
No, not me. Never. My daughter knew one of the script writers for The Simpsons.
My name is Lucy Hawking. My father is Stephen Hawking. My father appeared on The Simpsons in the late 90s for the first time. I'd been working at New York Magazine, and my boss there, Larry Doyle, had gone to California to become a writer on The Simpsons. And Larry contacted me and said, would it be possible for him to meet my dad? Because he'd like to put him on The Simpsons. And this was, I don't know that celebrity guest starring in things like The Simpsons was really a big deal at that point. It's still a very unusual thing to do. So I introduced him to my dad, and really the rest is genuinely history.
I accepted immediately, because it would be fun, and because The Simpsons is the best thing on American television. The episode was very funny, and almost as many people know me through The Simpsons as through my science. Your theory of a donut-shaped universe is intriguing, Homer. I may have to steal it. I was depicted as a somewhat surreal character with enormous powers. Pizza, 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 pizza. Sorry, that button sticks.
I'm Kitty Ferguson. I've written 8 books now about science and scientists and science history. This new book is Stephen Hawking, His Life and Work. And it's, I think of it really as quite a definitive biography of him. To me, it gives a very rich picture of him. And what I like about it, and I hope other people will like too, is that it does present, almost in alternate chapters or in alternate sections of chapters, his life story and his science. Because I feel the two are absolutely inseparable. You cannot understand this man without understanding one and the other.
Dear Professor Hawking, is yours the greatest mind of our time?
I certainly wouldn't claim to be the greatest mind of our time. It is only after the passage of time that we will see who were the outstanding figures.
It's not fair to disregard the fact that his physical condition also makes him tremendously different and interesting. Charismatic, it's not just his condition, but the way he deals with it.
Another facet of my father that people don't very rarely highlight is what a showman he is. He's a bit of an impresario at heart, and he loves a big show, a big stage, bright lights, whether it's him on stage or whether it's watching the spectacle. So there's something very grandiose and fabulous and brilliantly lit and entertaining about him. Wagner is his favourite composer. He loves the ring cycle.
Unfortunately, my speech synthesizer is not very well educated and pronounces him Wagner. I have to spell him V-A-R-G-N-E-R to get it to sound approximately right.
Celebrity attracts all sorts of different people, and why shouldn't it attract scientists? You know, but I don't think that Stephen has ever spent any real effort seeking celebrity. He's just come to him because of his unique story, I suppose.
But there is something different about him, that you're aware of. And I would get there, he comes in at about 11 o'clock. I would get there a little ahead of him just to be sure, I was there. And the lift doors would open and he would come out. And it was always for me as though there were just a tiny but very profound alteration in the feel of reality somehow when he came through there, that I had to make a slight readjustment myself. That sounds silly, and he might not even like my saying that, but it was a feeling, and I couldn't escape it. It would always return every time this happened. It was like a part of another world that was alien to me, but partly because of really superior intellect, partly because of disability, but maybe mainly because of a quality of will that he has about him that I've never encountered anywhere else, this strength of will. And that this part of another world was just passing over that little bridge and down the corridor and nearly running over my toes. And then his voice would say good morning or how are you, and everything would return to normal and we would get to work.
He's an icon. He's a rock star of physics, isn't he? He's got this incredible aura. You go in the room, you think, bloody hell, there's Stephen Hawking. You're suddenly removed of all of your normal communication tools. You know, when you go and see Stephen, you can't kind of charm him or use any of your kind of interpersonal skills with him because there's nothing coming back. Once you get to know him, you can communicate with him quite quickly because you learn to read his face and you learn to read his eyes. You're simultaneously in the presence of someone who's really one of the very most famous people on the planet, I would say. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. And yet you're simultaneously deprived of all of your communication skills. So it's a very odd moment when you first meet Stephen.
My success has enabled me to pay for my care and lead a fairly normal life. But fame has its disadvantages. I can't go anywhere without being recognized. It is not enough to wear a beard and dark glasses.
The last time I went in to interview him, I ended the interview by telling him that I realized that in writing this book, I was bound to get some things wrong, and there might be things in it that would even annoy him or make him unhappy. And I wanted to ask in advance for his forgiveness for that. And he said yes.
Should I tell you? We just transmitted one of the shows, and he wanted to say something to me, so I waited, and he said, "Ben, look at the sun." And I thought, look at the sun. So I looked out of the window, and his nurse said, "Oh no, he doesn't mean that kind of sun." And she reached in her handbag and pulled out the Sun newspaper, and on page 3 of the Sun newspaper was the usual page 3 shot with Cindy, 16, is a great fan of Stephen Hawking.
Working for Stephen is a great privilege. He is one of the most extraordinary people that has managed to survive on this planet. People will be talking about him 1,000 years after we're all gone. It does feel a little strange, that.
Dear Professor Hawking was produced by Julian Mayers and is a Sweet Talk production for BBC Radio 4. Now, just before the news, let me tell you about our Saturday play, in which Billy Connolly and Brian Cox star as two brothers on a quest to rescue a childhood sweetheart.
Well, now on Radio 4, Dear Professor Hawking, in which we continue our celebration of the life and work of the world's most famous scientist, who turns 70 this week. As well as being a hugely significant cosmologist and communicator of science, he's one of the most recognised human beings in the world due to his severe disability that's left him almost completely unable to move or speak.
I don't regard myself as cut off from normal life, and I don't think people around me would say I was. I don't feel a disabled person, just someone with certain malfunctions of my motor neurons. Rather as if I were colorblind. I suppose my life can hardly be described as usual, but I feel it is normal in spirit.
Dear Professor Hawking, do you feel that your physical limitations have helped or hindered your study?
Although I was unfortunate enough to get motor neuron disease, I have been very fortunate in almost everything else. I was lucky to be working in theoretical physics, one of the few areas in which disability was not a serious handicap. The mere fact of having to organize my thoughts so that I can explain them to others often shows me a new way forward.
Hello, I'm Judith Crosdell, and I'm Stephen Hawking's personal assistant. Always aware of the letters But again, time is my greatest enemy. I know Einstein made a point of responding to every single letter. Different world. Totally different world. Some are very sad about death and how accidents may have changed somebody's life, and wanting to know how Professor Hawking copes. I'm just looking at a letter here.
Dear Professor Hawking,
I'm writing to you because
I'm
you are my
writing to
hero.
you because you are my hero.
Paved my way.
You paved my way because you have physical problems and good cognition. I am 10 years old and have cerebral palsy, and also use an electric wheelchair, and am writing using my Dynavox communication system. You have been my hero all my life. I saw you on Star Trek and on the Discovery Channel. I read A Briefer History of Time and George's Secret Key to the Universe. I have always been fascinated by cosmology and theoretical physics. These are exciting times in those fields. My walls are papered with pictures and news clippings of you. My teachers never want to believe that I have the capacity to learn the subjects that truly interest me. I really know how long it takes us to write, but a letter from you would make all the frustrations go away and keep my goal in front of me. Sincerely and with loving admiration, Stanley Hodved. P.S. Did you notice we have the same initials?
Dear Professor Hawking, I'm Stanley's mother. He truly worships the ground you roll on, sir. This letter took him 3 hours to type. God bless you for all you've done for Stan without even knowing it. You are a miracle, sir. No two ways about it.
Well, that's a wonderful one. I've obviously managed to reply to this person. What I would do is actually get one of our rare photographs of him and use a preserved signature stamp, which was preserved from when he signed the Lucasian Chair University sort of book. Here it is. This is actually his last known signature.
Before I got motor neuron disease, I was bored with life. But the prospect of an early death made me realize life was really worth living. There is so much one can do, so much that anyone can do.
So I'm Paul Shellard, and I'm the director of the Centre for Theoretical Cosmology, which Stephen Hawking founded in 2007. I met him as a fresh new graduate student coming from Australia. This was in the early 80s, yes, and this was my aspiration coming from Sydney University, was to work with Stephen Hawking. At that stage, Stephen was able to speak in a very low murmur, I suppose you'd call it. But very few people in the world could understand it, so just a few of his close friends and his graduate students.
If our sun were to become a black hole.
So one of our most important functions was to interpret for Stephen.
We'd continue to orbit around it just as we do at the moment. But of course, we'd get rather cold.
We each had a day in the week when we were responsible for looking after Stephen. And of course, you know, he would be bringing up new ideas, bringing ideas from other areas. And so sometimes, you know, you weren't quite sure what words he was using, you know, and the first time you missed it, then he would repeat it. The second time you missed it, the temperature would rise, the tensions would feel. And the third time you missed it, you know, you had to watch out. You know, he might try and run you over with his wheelchair or something.
Dear Professor, I trust you'll excuse my presumption in writing to you regarding your medical problems. I hope my experiences may help you, as I know of a doctor who could cure you.
Kind attention, Mr. Stephen Hawking. Good day, sir. We have gone through all the cases from all websites with regard to disability by motor neuron disease, which is said to be incurable. However, we believe and assure
Professor Hawking, I'm sure you get a million of these emails, but I just wanted to say thank you for all you've contributed to science in the world, and also to say that you are a great inspiration to my family. My wife's mother passed away recently from ALS, and I wish she had had the opportunity to meet you. You are a true inspiration to us all. Thanks for listening.
I was in Geneva, at CERN, the big particle accelerator, in the summer of 1985. I caught pneumonia and was rushed to hospital. The hospital in Geneva suggested to my wife, that it was not worth keeping on the life support machine. But she was not having any of that. I was flown back to Edenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge, where a surgeon called Roger Gray carried out a tracheostomy.
As graduate students, we used to go and visit him on a 24-hour shifts. We'd each take 8 hours. And I always did the night shift because I was into supercomputing and I was used to staying up late at night. On one of the evenings I was there, that's when they made the decision that he needed a tracheostomy, and that's, ultimately when he lost his voice.
That operation saved my life, but took away my voice.
And so later that evening I came in and it had all been done.
But for a time after my operation, I was devastated. I felt that if I couldn't get my voice back, it was not worth carrying on.
I'm Tim Hawking. I'm Stephen's youngest son. I only have very vague recollections of my father before he lost his voice. And his voice, to me, as a 4-year-old, was pretty indecipherable, I remember. Ironically, I was just about starting to understand it and pick up various words from it around the time that he contracted pneumonia when I was about 6 years old. And that, of course, led to the voice box, which then really kind of completely revolutionised our relationship, I suppose, because I was then all of a sudden able to communicate with him on a normal basis.
Hello, I'm Sam Blackburn. My job title is Graduate Assistant to Stephen Hawking. My job is a completely technical one. It's to maintain the wheelchair and speech system and to try to upgrade where possible. Things do break. The wheelchair weighs 140 kilos. Whenever it gets driven into a door frame, which unfortunately is all the time, something is going to get damaged, and if you can replace that easily, it's far easier to maintain the system. So Stephen has used a menu system controlled by a computer to speak ever since about 1986. It highlights cells in a big grid of letters or words, and when the correct letter or word is highlighted, the user can press a switch of some sort. And Stephen originally used a sort of paddle switch. It's basically just something you squeeze in your hand, and he would squeeze that whenever the right bits of the screen were highlighted. The more recent changes have basically been that he became unable to move his hands sufficiently to operate the switch, and he therefore moved to an infrared-based system mounted on his glasses, and that system, we call it the blink switch informally, but it actually detects a movement in his cheek muscle, and whenever he tenses his cheek, that causes his skin to move closer to the sensor, which triggers the sensor with the same effect as pressing the switch.
In this way one can select words. When one has built up what one wants to say, one can send it to a speech synthesizer or save it on disk.
So this card here, I don't know if you've seen any computers back in the 1980s, but this is called a full-length ISA card, and this particularly strange one actually contains Stephen's voice. And we only have a couple of these cards. One is just here, the other is on the wheelchair. If one goes wrong, big trouble. There was a guy who put the system together.
His name was Wald Wolters. His mother-in-law had had the same condition as me, so he had developed a computer program to help her communicate.
However, all he did was buy this card from a company which went bankrupt and was bought by another company which went bankrupt and passed the intellectual property to another company which doesn't know about it.
My name is Lucy Hawking. My father is Stephen Hawking. My father now speaks through a computerised voice, and that voice is very, very familiar, not just to me, but to lots and lots of people worldwide. It's an enormously so recognisable that you could almost think it's like a trademark voice.
British people describe its accent as American, but the Americans say it is Scandinavian or Irish. Anyway, whatever it is, everyone can understand it.
And I went to Buckingham Palace with him to this party that the Queen had for people who were over 60 and still serving. And there was my dad talking to Richard Bryars. And it was so lovely. I wish we could have recorded it, because it was like these two iconic voices having a conversation with each other. And that was just lovely.
The voice is one of the unique things that defines Stephen, in my opinion. Stephen could easily change to a voice that was easier to understand, that was clearer, that perhaps was more soothing to listen to, I suppose, less robotic sounding. But the fact is, it wouldn't be Stephen's voice anymore. I could tell you, perhaps, that you could have a different voice, but next time you called up your relatives, they wouldn't recognise you anymore. And the next time Stephen appeared on television, if he didn't have that iconic voice, I don't think it would quite be the same.
So my father writes and speaks in a very brief and concise style.
Writing is very slow, but that gives me time to choose my words carefully.
And this means he has a great economy of style. It's a very sparse, very clear style of writing and speaking that is actually brilliant because he doesn't waffle. But he just comes out with one comment and it's so brilliantly placed. And you think, yes, that's it.
The mere fact of having to organize my thoughts so that I can explain them to others often shows me a new way forward.
He never needs to look at a reference for anything. It's all there in his head, and he can unpick a complicated problem. He'll listen and listen and listen to what you're saying. He'll think about it, and he'll come out with one phrase, and you just think, wow.
Stephen has a tremendous scientific legacy. I can identify 5 major breakthroughs that he made. Of course, he has a much broader legacy than that in the public imagination, because here they see somebody who overcame their limitations to do great things.
Because of his disability, he's received more attention than he would have done if he wasn't disabled. However, I would say that he fully deserves it, because to show the kind of commitment, the kind of persistence and the dedication to his work and to communication and to communicating his work to a lay audience that he has done, that takes somebody really special. And so I think if he gets more attention than other people, he totally deserves it.
I have been very lucky that my disability has not been a serious handicap. Indeed, it has probably given me more time than most people to pursue the quest for knowledge.
Dear Professor Hawking was produced by Julian Mayers and is a Sweet Talk production for BBC Radio 4. Now, William Andrews and Greg McHugh explore a surreal and absurd world in a brand new sketch show for Radio 4 tonight. It's a world replete with offbeat characters, from a man with the worst comebacks in town to a pedantic South African negotiator.
I've had word that your son is being held by a rebel militia in the heart of the Colombian jungle.
Oh, God.
Please, Mrs. Baxter, don't interrupt me. They already have your son. Don't let them take your manners as well.
Meanwhile, It's Will and Greg starts tonight at 11. After the news, it's The Archers.
Now on Radio 4, Dear Professor Hawking, in which we conclude our celebration of the life and work of the world's most famous scientist, who turns 70 this week. From the need for a creator to our future in space, Stephen Hawking has been at the forefront of tackling some of the most profound questions that connect mankind with the universe.
Where did we come from? How did the universe come into being? Are we alone in the universe? Is there alien life out there? What is the future of the human race?
Dear Professor Hawking, can you prove that God does not exist?
One can't prove that God doesn't exist, but science makes God unnecessary. The laws of physics can explain the universe without the need for a creator. If the universe has no boundaries but is self-contained, the way the universe began in the Big Bang would be determined by the laws of science. God would not have had any freedom to choose how the universe began. We are such insignificant creatures on a minor planet of a very average star in the outer suburbs of one of 100,000 million galaxies. So it is difficult to believe in a God that would care about us or even notice our existence. Instead, I would use the term God as the embodiment of the laws of physics.
Hello, I'm Judith Crosdell, and I'm Stephen Hawking's personal assistant. We get some very serious letters. We get a lot of religious letters, and of course, Stephen didn't mean to cause quite the fracas that he did with Grand Design. You know, he never wrote to upset people, but it's surprising how a lot of people felt that it was quite threatening.
Most Reverend Sir, after seeing your book, The Grand Design, it seems that you are questioning the necessity of God on the concepts of the God from Western mythology and the Bible. You have not referred to the Vedic or Indian concepts.
Dear Mr. Hawking, may God have mercy on your soul, for you are so terribly wrong.
Dear Stephen,
I would just like you...
I strongly suggest that in the future you refrain from any reference to God in the hereafter, if he exists.
That as a yoga practicing Christian, the aim of my letter is to disprove your theory.
Dear Professor Hawking, regarding your comment that science makes God unnecessary, I wonder if this finding of yours could be interpreted that God so marvellously made the world in the first place, a world that would then be able to take care of itself.
Please give up the search for God. A mere mortal will never achieve it.
Dear Professor Hawking, why do so many human beings seem to need a God?
People want to think there is something they can relate to, and which can make them feel they are not isolated, but are part of a larger whole. They seek it as the authority for an ethical system, and a lifestyle they can aspire to, but not necessarily achieve. God as the embodiment of the laws of physics.
My name's Ben Bowie. I'm executive producer of a TV series with Stephen for Discovery Channel called Into the Universe with Stephen Hawking, and a second series called Stephen Hawking's Grand Design. The second series we've just done with him kicked off with a film where Stephen asks, do you need a creator to build the universe?
I have no desire to tell anyone what to believe, but for me, asking if God exists is a valid question for science.
And it was very interesting. It was transmitted prime time, Sunday afternoon, in the USA, nationwide, on 6 channels all at once. And, you know, we were sort of peeking over the top of the bunker, you can imagine, you know, thinking, what's going to happen here, you know? Because, you know, America is an interesting place to broadcast something like that.
For centuries, it was believed that disabled people, like me, were living under a curse inflicted by God. While I suppose it's possible that I've upset someone up there, I prefer to think that everything can be explained another way, by the laws of nature.
And I was amazed because the reviews came in and people were saying not that he shouldn't be allowed to say this, but actually how it made them think that actually there are a few people who are willing to put that point of view in a mass form of communication. And that I thought was very, very interesting. But Stephen didn't take anything for granted, and he also didn't say, I'm telling you what to think. He said, you know, you're free to believe what you wish, but I believe as a scientist that this is the truth, or that this is the way to think about it.
All my work has shown is that you don't have to say that the way the universe began was a personal whim of God. But you still have the question, why does the universe bother to exist? If you like, you can define God to be the answer to that question. God as the embodiment of the laws of physics. God as the embodiment of the laws of physics.
And then occasionally we get the visitors who have had contact from alien beings or Darth Vader or whoever, and they're quite interesting as well. We haven't had so many, actually. I think people have sort of finally got the message that they're not really going to get a chance of seeing Professor Hawking. They just show up.
I'm Kip Thorne. I'm at Caltech. I'm the Richard P. Feynman Professor Emeritus because I retired 2 years ago in order to have more time for my own research and for writing and movies. Science fiction is certainly a vehicle by which both Stephen and I in recent years have been trying to communicate to a wider audience, both in terms of inspiring young people to pursue science as careers, in terms of inspiring those who are not particularly interested in science to understand at least what science is about and appreciate it. I think that doing this through fiction is a powerful approach, but both Stephen and I are just at the beginning of that.
My name is Lucy Hawking. My father is Stephen Hawking. One thing Dad did that I can't imagine anyone else of his status in science doing. At the Museum of Science Fiction in Seattle, they have a paper of my father's that he donated to them because he had changed his mind so dramatically on the contents that he decided it was, after all, a work of science fiction. And I think that's just brilliant, and I can't imagine anyone else doing that.
Hi, Professor Hawking. I was wondering whether you're familiar with the thoughts and theory proposed by Zecharia Sitchin concerning the 12th planet and the Anunnaki era, in which he proposes that human origins came from ancient astronauts. What do you think?
Dear Professor Hawking, if you had to guess either way, do you think it's more likely that we're alone in the Milky Way as a civilization of our intelligence or higher?
Life appeared spontaneously on Earth, or nearby, within the last 10 billion years. So one would expect life to appear elsewhere in the universe, though it might be a long way away. There don't seem to be any advanced intelligent aliens in our region of the galaxy, or we would have heard their radio signals.
When will the human race meet its end?
Life in the universe will cease to be possible when the universe becomes cold, dark, and empty in about 15 billion years. But the real danger is that the human race will destroy itself on a much shorter time scale. To have a chance of long-term survival, we will have to spread out into space.
Do you think our civilization will survive long enough to make the leap to deeper space?
I think we have a good chance of surviving long enough to colonize the solar system. However, there is nowhere else in the solar system anything like as suitable as the Earth, so it is not clear if we would survive if the Earth was made unfit for habitation. To ensure our long-term survival, we need to reach the stars. That will take much longer. Let's hope we can last until then.
Dear Professor Hawking, I've been interested by the fact that you seem to think that we should not send out radio signals into space in case they're picked up by hostile aliens. However, I have known since I was a boy that anyone out there who would be able to make a craft to hear these signals from the stars would not need telling that we are here, since they would also be able to detect what I call the essence of life given off by all plants, trees, animals and humans. They would also be able to detect our atmosphere, indicating a civilization. I've also heard people on TV say, look what happened to the Red Indians when America was discovered. But that was humans against humans, not a 1 million year old alien civilization against humans. An advanced alien civilization may still be hostile, but when a civilization has evolved over 1 million years and is capable of monitoring us, surely they would have gone beyond the need for any conquest. Perhaps that's why we've not been attacked so far.
If we are the only intelligent beings in the galaxy, we should make sure we survive and continue. But we are entering an increasingly dangerous period of our history. Our population and our use of the finite resources of planet Earth are growing exponentially, along with our technical ability to change the environment for good or ill. But our genetic code still carries the selfish and aggressive instincts that were of survival advantage in the past. It will be difficult enough to avoid disaster in the next 100 years, let alone the next 1,000 or million. Our only chance of long-term survival is not to remain inward-looking on planet Earth, but to spread out into space? The answers to these big questions show that we have made remarkable progress in the last 100 years. But if we want to continue beyond the next 100 years, our future is in space. That is why I'm in favor of manned, or should I say, personed, space flight.
This is a good place to work because you do hear incredible stories about the cosmos, and in a way, I suppose the fans and all these letters reflects the hopes and fears of the planet in some respects. It's a philosophical journey sometimes, working for somebody who is so extraordinary.
He's an inspiration both as a scientist and as a demonstration of what can be done when you're living with a physical disability.
As Stephen has said so many times, you know, the secret of survival is being able to adapt. It's really about intelligence. It's not about physical fitness. It's all about being able to adapt.
There are very few colleagues that I look up to as being a lot smarter than I am, but Hawking is one.
I think I've been very inspired by his example, whether it's a trait that I've inherited from him or whether it's something that I've gained from observing his life. But this idea that you just have to keep going and that life is not easy and that life for a lot of people really is a struggle, but that you have to keep on going and you have to keep trying.
God as the embodiment of the laws of physics. God as the embodiment of the laws of physics.